that. Okay, we have kicked that off, and let me kick off the stream. Give me 1 second. It is loading. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. So, sorry, I was getting feedback. I was hearing myself on the stream and in here. All right, we can get started. So I'll pop the screen share back on, just so we can use that as the grounding. So, yep, thanks everyone for joining us again today. I'll go into presenter mode. Yeah. So yeah, at the very least, we've asked folks where we're watching from. So I think it's really cool to see we have some folks from all over, which is always pretty neat. States specifically. Going to see if there's any call outs
Someone's joining from the Poconos.
Oh, all right. I do enjoy the Poconos.
John Zhao's cadence, which makes me sleepy.
This guy?
Yeah.
Oh, no, he's not the main one. There's multiple.
Oh, I think somebody, a co-host, if you're able to kind of maintain. Yeah, tweet. All right, yeah, got a lot from the States here, so that's awesome. And more importantly, how's everyone feeling? Excited, tired? If panelists, moderator, if anyone notes anything interesting, but yeah.
I love the readiness that we're seeing, some hopefulness, determined.
Store from the gym, that's always good. Giving the mind and body, really important.
Yeah.
But
those of you who are hungry, I can relate.
Oh yeah, hopefully. Oh yeah, make sure this keep yourself hydrated and keep yourself fed. I have some figs here, so I'm just I probably should have eaten it earlier, but that's okay. But yeah, so good. Seems like folks are feeling a range of emotions, which definitely, makes sense. It's always been a time. So
yeah. Given, we just went through Thanksgiving holidays, seems like, that's a time of reflection and a lot of feelings that arise. So regardless of how you feel, thank you all for joining us.
All right. So with that, so just for quick reference, moderators for today's event are myself, Christian DeLuna. I'm one of the co-founders of the Asian Mental Health Collective and the Waves group. I'm currently serving as chief strategy for the group. A survivor of major depressive disorder, 20 years now, video game and mental health geek. So back in my grad days, that's kind of that was my main thing to do, just looking at those intersections. And in my day job, I work as project manager in the tech space, and hand to Kimmy, my
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Kimmy Wu. I am currently an intern therapist here in Washington, D.C. My pronoun are she, her, and I'm also a counseling graduate student at Northwestern University, and I am a recovering perfectionist.
And I'm sure a lot of folks in the room can relate. So, all right. There we are. So yeah, just for quick reference, what is Waves? So Waves is part of, for one, the Asian Mental Health Collective, which is a consortium of different activities programming under the blanket of the 501c3 nonprofit of Asian Mental Health Collective. So again, some of the things we do, we run the Subtle Asian Mental Health Facebook page, the Asian Mental Health Professionals group. We have the Lotus Therapy Fund, which is our program for providing subsidized therapy, free therapy for a cohort of folks. So we just launched our most recent group, and we'll be looking to launch one in the beginning of the new year. So we'll give more info about that. And we also have, as mentioned, our Waves team, which is a group that looks to advance our mission of normalizing and destigmatizing mental health in the Asian community by providing just spaces to be able to share and be open about the experiences. Again, big part of destigmatizing is just being able to have the space to talk about these things without much difficulty or fear of being judged. So that's kind of what we open here. And we do a lot of events such as roundtables, speaker workshops, panels such as this, and other meetups. So we're looking to move back into the local spaces. So that'll be something to keep an eye out for in the months to come as things open up again.
So as always, we want to start off by setting some group norms for our events to ensure, an inclusive engagement of folks present today. So here are some of the guidelines. We will come as we are and take what we need. We will treat each other with dignity and respect. We will assume good intent and meet others where they are. We will learn from each other and also share when appropriate. We will de-identify if we share someone else's stories and experiences. And lastly, we would treat ourselves with empathy, compassion, and kindness. So, this event is not meant to replace therapy. It may include some content or language that is triggering or upsetting. So we want to acknowledge that each and every one of you come with your own life experiences that can contribute the way to how you perceive various information. So if you feel disturbed intellectually or emotionally by any of the information or discussion throughout, we ask that you kindly take the appropriate measure to keep yourself safe. And if leaving the space is what you need, please do so. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Monica Ban to guide us through some breath work to kick us off. So Monica, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hear me just fine? Wonderful. Okay, I'm seeing some head nods and some thumbs. In addition to breath work, I'm moved by sort of the intentions and norms set by this group. So I also have a few thoughts maybe that I'll intermingle in mantras along with our breath work to set the tone and perhaps ground us. One thing I want us to pay attention to is particularly how we spend our time, and not just today, although today is a really wonderful reflective measure of our giving of time, but perhaps how we have and how we will be using our time. And I focus on this because I personally feel that, and maybe many will agree, that time is a very valuable commodity, if not the most valuable commodity that we have to give and hold and receive from other people. And in doing so, let's pay attention to how our values are reflected in the time that we use. And so many of you here are here because you value, I imagine, growth and mental health and well-being and finding and seeking answers and healing. These are all values that and I'm sure there's more there. There's values that are connecting us right now together in this space. And so let's pay attention to that now and in this moment, that you are using your time as a reflection of your own values. And by doing so, you're connecting with others with the shared values. And I think in this way, it creates that visibility in numbers that we're all looking to destigmatize mental health and mental health conversations. So I'm very appreciative for that. So with that said, I ask you can keep your eyes open or closed, whatever you feel most comfortable with, and I'll probably be doing a little bit of both with you. What I want us to do is just begin to meet yourself where you're at, similarly to how Kimmy and Christian were sharing with us. I just want you to find your breath and how it's showing up in this moment. And you actually may find that it's a little shallow, or perhaps we're breathing through a certain part of our body. I ask that we notice that we can quickly judge the way we're doing something, and we can begin to assign whether or not we're doing something the right or wrong way. Rather that, I challenge you, instead of creating a value to your breath, you just kindly notice it with curiosity. Your body is automatically showing up for you in a way that it needs to. without you even noticing or thinking about it. And how can that be wrong? Again, without forcing it, without pushing it or breathing too deeply, we're just breathing how we naturally showed up in this space. In this silence we're beginning to expand together and create, I want us to also notice this theme. This theme we might have a tension with, this theme called gratitude, the season of gratitude and giving that we find ourselves surrounding, perhaps in spaces of the holiday. There might be a tension in how we have been told to be grateful for things that maybe we don't intrinsically feel grateful for, perhaps hardships, perhaps things we've had to endure. It's okay not to force gratitude. It's a beautiful practice when it is sincere and authentic, but no season, no person, no power can tell you how to use that and express that. Notice your breath. When we are activated and feeling a lot, our breath is typically the first thing that goes. And it's the first thing we need. So notice for yourself any changes in that breath. Perhaps in anything that I've just shared now. I've been telling you and asking you to meet yourself where you're at. And what I'm going to ask you to do now is that if you can, you have the capacity to, I want you to meet all of us together, this collective group and this collective space that we are starting to create together. I'm going to ask you all, if you can, to breathe with me. Breathe in and out. Notice how I didn't say how. I want you to determine that for yourself. Simply breathe in with me and out. As I begin to close out with this breath work and a little bit of mindfulness here, I want you to pay attention to your relationship with silence in this experience together that we have. The music stopped. There were pauses in my sharing. This allowed you space to think and think for yourself. Something that I say often to the folks I work with is that growth happens certainly when you are uncomfortable, but it should never happen when you're unsafe. So begin to notice the difference in those two phenomenon. You may experience some discomfort today in that silence, but if you start to feel unsafe, this is where we decide what we need. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for reconnecting to yourselves, for listening some of my words here. And I hope we can continue to do that today. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica, for that. I think it's always great to be able to reground, recenter, especially after crazy times. So hopefully folks are a little bit more at ease and finding yourself where you're at, as Dr. Band mentioned. So I guess with that, go over a quick agenda about where we're going to be going in the next hour and 40 with everyone in the room together. So for one, Kimmy's going to be taking us through a quick kind of just defining what intergenerational trauma means. For some folks in the room may have different levels of engagement, understanding of the terminology, but we want to make sure everyone here has a good grounding to understand some of the conversations. It's definitely some heavy stuff emotionally, so we just want to make sure that there's no overload just on terminology that we go into it. So, and then on that, we'll go straight into the panel. We'll have some amazing panelists with us, lucky to have today. And we'll do some quick intros. After that, we do have some small group breakouts and processing. So we'll just have some activities for those who are inclined to be able to want to just share and talk with some folks who are also in the session to reflect. And lastly, we'll look to come back as a group, have a larger share out of some of the things we've learned. We'll do a similar closeout activity that we had to the beginning, just to do a bit of a reflection and a recap. And lastly, we'll close out and let everyone kind of continue on with their days. So with that, yeah, I think we'll start with our panelist intro. So yeah, I'll take the ball first. So I have the pleasure and honor of introducing Sarah. She's one of our frequent returning panelists for our events. Always an absolute pleasure to have her on. She's therapist, group practice, and in queer first gen Afghan American speaker, business coach, licensed therapist. Leads clinical and professional work focusing on queer and trans affirming practices, specifically for first gen Americans, immigrant communities, and working with the Afghan diaspora to find community and reconciliation with self, culture, and ancestry. So Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. You said it all, so thank you.
Yeah, we'll dive in soon enough and hear your stories. I'm super stoked for that.
And next we have Miss Bavia Ray. So Bavia here is a 25-year-old neurodivergent South Asian American change maker. She is a storyteller via a new MTV show that's coming out called Off the Pedestal. And we're also very happy to have her here to share some of the untold stories that she has prepared for us.
Also, a shout out. She was, oh, sorry, Bob. Yeah, I just want to say I'm proud because Bavia was one of the mental health youth forum participants who got to go to the White House and meet the president, Selena Gomez, and Jill Biden, and representing the upcoming youth changers. But yeah, I got to work with her, so super proud and jazzed to have her on board.
Thank you. Definitely a peak moment. Appreciate it so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Next, we have Kiki, who's just starting recently up in the Bay Area as a clinician, Department of Child and Adolescent Psych at Stanford Medicine. She's a documented Vietnamese licensed therapist, certified clinical trauma professional, and identity as complex trauma survivor and undocumented Southeast Asian immigrant. Kind of informs that clinical lens to trauma healing in particular, and just kind of emphasizing the unique lived experiences that folks have gone through, and being able to recover and thrive more so. So Kiki, thanks for joining us.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And next we have Dr. Monica Band, who is a mental health therapist, advocate, and educator, and also a personal mentor of mine. Dr. Band is an award-winning therapist who specializes in EMDR, mindfulness, and somatic-based work. As an advocate, she also consults with the JED Foundation and the ACOMA project with Dr. Alfie on mental health public education for BIPOC and LGBTQIA youth. And she is also currently an adjunct professor at George Mason University. And she is located in Washington, D.C., where I am as well. Thank you for being here, Dr. Band.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Calvin Sun, author, emergency physician, clinical assistant professor, world traveler, and adding on to author, recent book release and critical acclaim. So super excited to have him on board. Traveling to over 190 countries in his work, medical field, in the medical field, has recently, again, as mentioned, through HarperCollins, published The Monsoon Diaries, A Doctor's Journey of Hope and Healing from the ER front lines to the far reaches of the world. And yeah, we'll definitely be getting into a lot of the content I know has informed his kind of what he's brought into these sessions, which has been super insightful and healing to see and hear. But yeah, Dr. Calvin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Christian. And grateful to have been invited to share the space with all of you.
So yeah, Kimmy, if you want to kind of just walk us through some of that grounding and some of that background then we can get into.
Yeah, absolutely. So intergenerational trauma, also sometimes known as transgenerational trauma, refers to the physical and mental symptoms experienced from trauma that are often shared with our descendants. It is often observed through parents' habitual responses to stressors or behavior passed to their child with implication for the child's health and well-being. And an important note about intergenerational trauma, as opposed to something like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is that one can experience its effect even if they did not undergo trauma themselves. So this is prevalent in the API community because of various atrocities that our ancestors have endured, and also the racial trauma such as racism, microaggressions, biases, discrimination, and even, the recent rise of API hate crimes during the COVID-19 pandemic that we experienced. Next slide, please. So intergenerational trauma can manifest through epigenetics based on the theory that trauma can be inherited through epigenetic changes that are made to a person's DNA. Now, we're not referring to genetic mutation, but instead how trauma can alter how our genes function. Next, intergenerational trauma can also manifest in our physical health. An example is a study that found that Cambodian genocide refugees were more likely to develop type 2 diabetes due to food insecurities and malnutrition earlier in life. And lastly, intergenerational trauma can also play a role in our psychological and mental well-being as well. Something that maybe many of us can probably connect on is our lack of conversation about our emotions in our household growing up. This kind of negatively impacts us because we miss out on the opportunity to learn to identify, understand, and communicate our emotions and feelings with each other. So not only does this affect us on an individual level, it also affects us on a systemic level by perpetuating the model minority myth, which drives transracial conflict, discrimination, and feelings of otherness within the API community. Next, Christian, thank you. So you might ask, how is intergenerational trauma affecting me? Here are some examples of how it can show up in the API community. So that being fond responses, our tendency to please and appease to abusers, hypervigilance, acculturative stress, inability to identify, understand, or reject how we feel, having self-doubt despite accomplishments, or as we call it, imposter syndrome nowadays, loss of identity, socially prescribed perfectionism, stigmatized belief around healthcare treatments, filial piety, suppressing guilt or shame, strained relationships with others, feeling guilty when we spend money, sexual repression, and many, many other ways. So without conversations and proper intervention, we would allow maladaptive patterns of physical illnesses and emotional dysregulation to continue to be passed down. And, by exploring how historical events that shaped our ancestral patterns and our personal events that shape our realities, we aim to understand the context and impact of intergenerational trauma through this upcoming panel discussion. So to start us off, directing this to our panelists, I'd like for each of you to share in your own words, why are we here? Why is this conversation so important?
I'd be happy to speak. What comes up for me is doing something with the privileges that we are afforded as a new generation of folks who are given choices and a voice in a way that I can only speak for myself. I know my parents did not have. And as I say that out loud, I think to myself, in the process of doing that and the journey and search for those words and unlearning this is not guilt-induced. This is for me, and this is for the relationships and people that I surround myself with to be a more authentic version of myself. And so we're here collectively. I'm here because there's a genuine curiosity and motivation to do something, simply put, do something with the privileges and the choices that our parents and our ancestors have given us and allowed us in so many ways. And so broad stroking, that's sort of my response that comes up immediately for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Monica. And I'm curious also too, as panelists go through kind of sharing what it means, but I'm curious to know just folks' background, where you're coming from, your family. And yeah, we're very big on the importance of the stories of the individual. So just being able to hear that we all have stories worth telling and sharing. So, but yeah, if you wanted to share a little bit of kind of your background too, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I got into this work, I think, before I knew it was something that you could do as work when I was much younger. And I'm biracial Chinese American, and I grew up in a rural part of Virginia, probably now developed. We'd call it probably suburban part of Virginia. And in doing so, I have really vivid memories of how the world and my peers and my community treated me as someone of a different background. Let's say, I don't want to use the word minority here, as I've been told by Dr. Alfie and reminded there's nothing minor about us. And so I'm going to work to unlearn that term. But there's a distinct memory that sticks out to me that I'd be happy to share with you all. And I think it was a pivotal moment in sort of how I understood how the world treats me, because certainly at a young age, as a kid, for me, I didn't think that anything was different about me necessarily, but the world treated me differently. My peers pointed out my differences and what I ate and how I looked, and my parents' customs, and probably not a unique story amongst many of us. And I would go home after having been bullied and crying and upset and not understanding or wondering why someone didn't like me simply because, or wanted to be around me simply because I was different. And that was a very hard lesson to learn when I was really young. And I hope many children don't have to ever experience that, but I know they do. And so I would remember coming home to my mom, who's Chinese American, and she would tell me, well, I asked her, people are asking me, what am I? What am I? Who am I? Those are really big existential questions for a young kid, by the way. Things that I know my partner, who's Persian American, but white passing, interestingly enough, certainly didn't have to think about the same way that I did. And I often talk about this amongst friends. And I think to myself, wow, what a big question to be asked that when you're younger. And I can attribute sort of my mom trying to rehearse with me, like, well, you tell them that you are Chinese American, that you're Asian Caucasian, that you are Asian, and just needing to explain who I was to someone and find the language. I didn't have a definition for what Caucasian was, by the way, when I was like 8, 7, 6. I don't know what that was, but what I did know as a kid, I picked up on the unspoken message that whatever that was safer. Because as soon as you would say something like that, that was more valued. That meant, okay, well, I'm one of you, and that protects me. And it unfortunately or not, because it led me to doing a lot of identity work in a therapeutic setting, but it really forced me to confront the early messages we receive about what we value and who we value. And that was a really big for me as a child. And so talk about sort of intergenerational, sort of setting the tone for both physical and emotional values moving forward in my adult life. That really struck a chord for me. So I carry that story with me, and that inner child to say, you know, okay, I've figured out, and I'm happy, genuinely happy with who I am, in a place where I don't necessarily need to explain who I am, certainly not in a defensive way anyway. So thanks for giving me space to share that off the cuff with you all. And thanks, Christian, for helping me with that. And thank you, Sarah, for the love. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Band. You know, I hear you about feeling that otherness as a young child, trying to figure out who we are, what we're supposed to be, you know, not just on the home front, but also as we face society and how they view us. So, you know, I'm very touched and very inspired by you really owning your curiosity and, you know, trying to do the work and claiming your power and doing something about it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Huing. Hi, Dr. Ben. Thank you so much for sharing your message. I resonate a lot with what you say. I am a Vietnamese immigrant, but I'm also very proud to be a DACA immigrant. So, which is so different. I guess unique is more of a term I like to say, because oftentimes I remember the same thing when I was growing up. I came to the United States when I was 11. And so at the time, I was already, like many people who immigrate to the United States, trying to learn English and trying to figure out what happened. Like, why did I move to the United States? You know, why did my dad bring me here? And I think for my reason was the poor factor was for medical treatments, which is also very unique, different than majority of the Asian American people moved to America for different reasons. But for my reasons, it was for medical treatments. And then I came here. And so I also a burn survivor. So I have physical differences as well, uniqueness. And so there's layers of my identities that I was trying to figure out at 11 years old. Like, how do I navigate these complex identities? And I think that's also a beautiful part, because since young, I was driven to kind of like with this curiosity of how to connect with myself, but also like help my family kind of understand what was going on. Because I remember my father, this part as I was reflecting about this topic today, I was thinking about what was he going through at that time? Like, what was in his mind? Because I was thinking how back then I was a child, and all I was focusing on, it was like, what was going on? What was my need? Like, how's my need being met? And not acknowledging, or not able to really acknowledge at a young age what my father had to leave behind, and the loss and the grieving and all that pain that he has to deal with, and all the trauma that he has to deal with. But that I also, you know, brought me to where I am today, and, you know, honoring different parts of me, my identity, and holding it all together equally. Being, you know, Vietnamese immigrant, but being DACA and holding it out with pride is it comes to our own, therapeutic work. But then it's this part right now that I get to be in collective space and share with you all.
Kiki,
Thanks
thank
for
you so
sharing.
much.
Thank you so much for sharing. My name is Bavia. I was born in India, right around New Delhi, in a city called Noida. And I immigrated here with my parents when I was just a day before I turned 1. And my parents came from an arranged marriage. We were the first 3 in our entire family to move to anywhere else. And intergenerational trauma in general, I think, sticks out to me to talk about, simply because like so much of it just factored into what I thought was my identity for most of my life. And my identity was so much more than that, and so much more complex than what I believed it to be. And the other side of that's so important to me is the youth mental health part, because if we can have these conversations earlier and intervene earlier, and we can grow so much more of that gratitude and self-love and more of those emotions that we might not have seen reflected in our homes. And the resources and people exist to just remind us that we really aren't alone. So like sharing these stories and hearing these stories from so many different experiences, and the diversity of the experiences, even the panelists in this room and everyone who's facilitating, like that's what has helped me learn new strategies and alternatives when I was feeling so low myself that I couldn't see solutions. So I think that we've been there in different ways. And I think just hearing those experiences is and sharing them is just so critical. So that is definitely why I feel so grateful to be in this room and have this conversation myself. So thank you.
Sarah, would you like to get next? I see the gesturing to
I
take
said, I
and
like
Sarah's
unmuted
we're in
myself 6
different
times. I
rooms.
was like, I'm not doing it again. It's like, forget it. No one cares. Oh my God. I've been thinking about this idea of generational trauma as so, when people hear it, they're like, oh, wow, so many ancestors and like the history and the heritage. And for many of us, it's, including myself, my family is from Afghanistan. I was born here in Los Angeles, and it's not removed. It's like very, very, very present. Extra present because I'm at my dad's house right now. Oh my God. But it's very present. I'm seeing it now that I'm a therapist. I've been doing this work for 10 years. I'm re-seeing and translating these things from a new perspective of like, oh, I thought that was just my family. I thought that was just my culture. And so many more things I'm seeing as like, I don't want trauma to define my culture by any means, which it doesn't, but I'm sort of reinterpreting these things, and it helps me to have more. I know everybody's saying like have self-compassion, have empathy, set boundaries with your family. Some things you should be able to take and some things you should like stand up for. And it's so hard when you're in the middle of it, when you're literally sitting at the table with these older generations and younger generations too, by the way, to kind of parse through, well, what am I allowed to put up with, and I just want to acknowledge the confusion that it can be present for a lot of people of like, well, do I have the right to be mad about this? Should I give grace because my parents don't know the words for these things and we never talked about it? Or is it my responsibility to teach them, because that is part of coming here to like learn more things and to bring this culture into our home? And I feel, we talked about gratitude. I feel immense gratitude. I say all the time, like based on the things that I personally and my family went through, it's like, I should be on like intervention. I should be on some show where it's like, this is where my childhood was so difficult. And this is where I like wasn't able to, and here I am running 2 businesses, like happy with a social life. And I just overcame. There's like a lot of things that I'm sure everybody watching this too is like, yeah, I can rattle off 10, 15 reasons why I shouldn't be here. And yet I am. And so we're living the opposite of trauma right now. So I just want to, thanks, Richard. I vibe with you too. All right, I'm going to stop talking now.
That's very powerful, the thought of living the past as if it were present. I like to first, my answer was, why are we here? To that question, the selfish part of me would be to break a cycle of intergenerational trauma. But I think the right word for me, as I thought about it, is actually realigning the cycle. It's very easy for us to assume that our parents or guardians and their parents did their best to take care of whatever children they had and whatever insecurities they had as human beings, because we tend to forget that our parents were not perfect, or our guardians and their parents weren't perfect, and they projected those insecurities on the next generation, and we carry that on our shoulders. And somehow we're the generation now to be self-aware, to create a space like this, assuming that our parents didn't have spaces like these. And I like to have said many times that they didn't learn the language, it's not their fault, and therefore it's incumbent upon us, to having learned this language, a generation that creates spaces like these, to then bear the responsibility to understand what our parents and their parents' parents had went through, so that we better understand ourselves. And the more I thought about it, especially when spaces like these were offered to all of us, I thought, well, they did their best in their spaces, and they thought they were probably realigning their parents' insecurities and realigning the way that they best knew how, so they wouldn't project it onto us. But we are destined and doomed to always repeat mistakes for ourselves, but let alone our parents. As a clinician, as a doctor, I've learned that, and not just experientially, but also and anecdotally, that DNA inherits trauma. The things that a generation can go through scientifically does pass in through the genes of their children. So what we learn from famines, the children of pregnant women during famines tend to hold on weight more readily, or have struggle with mental health in a way that is creates a signal that's created a lot of research in understanding that epigenetics is a real thing. It's not just a theory. And if that's the case, us as Asian Americans, who not only have to bear the burden of being different or living differently in the status quo, also take on what our parents expect upon us in an anecdotal sense and also a genetic sense. So I think why we're here is to see what we can do, what the best we can do right now, so that we can realign the cycle, so it's better for our children's children, so they don't have to inherit as much of the trauma that we've inherited from our parents. But we're also human as well, and not perfect, and knowing that this space reminds ourselves that no matter how much we try, we also have to practice self-forgiveness and self-compassion, that our children may resent us for certain things as much as we try hard, but at least the effort is there, and doing our best is already more than enough of quote unquote breaking or realigning the cycle.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing, your very powerful words and experiences, and your individual backgrounds, and how that informs this conversation. I'm hearing, such unique stories and intersectionalities that really play a role in each and every one of you, that makes your work just so incredibly important. And, to your point, Calvin, it is truly a privilege for us to build spaces such as these to, help build awareness within this generation, so that we can realign and break the cycle in the way that helps heal next generations and ourselves. So thank you once again for being here and joining us for this, incredibly powerful conversation.
One of the things I wanted to mention too is, Calvin, I know a lot of what we've chatted about in a lot of our pre-panel events is just kind of the relationship you had with your father, who unfortunately passed away. And I'd love to invite you to share some of experience, because I know one of the things we've talked about in general is, how do you have these conversations with our relatives, ancestors, who may not have the words to share on these experiences, especially before it's too late to be able to hear. But yeah, I know that's been an important topic for you. So yeah.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, the space I am navigating through right now, when putting an environment like this, is how have I communicated with a parent or guardian who is absent physically, emotionally. And when he was alive, I was coming to be aware of trying to communicate with our parents before they pass. I mean, he was in pretty good health. I mean, his death was sudden and unexpected. But, my grandmother, she had died about 2 years before he passed. And just being aware that having their presence is already enough of a gratitude, and joking at the time, like, oh, they don't even have the language to communicate. They didn't create spaces like these. Or we had assumed that what I had said 5 minutes ago, that we assumed that our parents were trying to put food on the table. They were trying to take care of us. The last thing they had was the privilege to get around in a table with other of our parents to talk like this, to talk about, like what have they went through with their parents. And that's okay. Like, maybe that's incumbent on us to teach them that. But just as that happens, we try, and it's easier said than done. And a lot of times it comes to a lot of frustration, especially when knowing that you can't help someone that doesn't want to be helped, or isn't ready to be helped, or hasn't learned the language. Who's to say that they're ready for us, or they're ready to even talk about things they never learned to have talked about in the past? And the space I'm in now, without my father around, my mother has Parkinson's, so she can't really communicate the way I would love to communicate with her, is the alternative and creative forms of communication without having your parents communicate back the way you would want them to. So in my particular case, I never got to have a conversation with my father. He had opened up only a week before he suddenly died. He had said something, it caught me off guard. He said he'll tell me later, and then he went off for a week and then came back and then died suddenly. So I never really understood what the invitation was when he had told me he was proud of me for the first time. And it just came out of nowhere. Joan Didion's book kind of suggested that that's something that parents do, or the loved ones do to another loved one unwittingly when their body feels like they're about to pass. It's like a theory, something about, when you inherit trauma in your DNA, same thing. When something in your body knows that it's about to pass, you do things and you communicate things in a way that you don't expect yourself to a loved one. And maybe that was it. But after he was gone, all I could commune with were things I could find through his closet when I was cleaning it out. One was his camera, which I take with me on my travels. The other were his diaries that he wrote to my older brother, who's 14 years older, when he was going through a divorce. And there's books and books about how he wrote to my brother, how he wished he could be there. And I never knew this about him, that he was a writer. He has never written, I have never found anything that he's written anything about me or to me. But the irony is I'm the one who read through all of them. And my brother to this day hasn't read it, refuses to. And my writing a book that has now just come out 2 months ago was probably my way of communicating with my father, that can reconcile all the unspoken narratives that he wanted to commune with me before he died. And it's still a work in progress, but that is an indication to me that it is still hope for those of you who are in this room who like the thought of communicating with your parents and trying to figure things out of what they have passed down to you, but knowing that there's not just one way of doing things, and there are plenty of other creative ways you can communicate with your loved ones if the direct way seems too overwhelming and intimidating. Another thing that I thought about when my grandmother was dying was to take a tape recorder and just pressing record and letting them talk without you being in the room, because maybe that's a way for parents can commune without they're probably as scared of you as you are scared of them, and they're just not going to say it. So having a tape recorder may be the gray zone area that's good enough, because sometimes we have to teach ourselves that good enough is good enough.
Yeah. And Calvin's book truly is a beautiful piece of art, I would say, that he has created to honor his relationship with his father, as well as, with himself and the way he exists in this world. So thank you for sharing that. And, to kind of follow up with this theme of, not having a common language, perhaps with our ancestors, with our parents or grandparents, I would love to invite our other panelists to also share, how do you reach out to our older demographics within the community who may not share the same language, or even, similar cultures in a sense, depending on our generation and acculturation status and all that. How are ways that we can really connect with each other?
You know, I wanted to say something like earlier. I was talking about how we don't have the same language, and you know, some of us have mentioned like our parents didn't have spaces like this. And I'm just like, it's banging me over the head like, yeah, they did. Like our cultures absolutely were built around spaces like this, just not over Zoom and not within a meeting agenda and not with like everybody sharing their, you know, credentials. But I know in Afghan culture, people sat, I mean, everything was in a circle, everything was communal, everything was, and so just if we're gonna look at this from, I swear I'm only gonna say the word decolonize like one time today because it's like so watered down, but if we recognize that we are unlearning, I don't want to say like, oh, we need to help them to come out of the dark ages and learn the ways of like Sigmund Freud. Like we're not doing that. So please, like therapy is not the only way, and it's not even the main way that our parents will recognize how we want to connect with them. And when I said that I'm re-looking at these things through this new perspective and this new lens, I am, rather than those things that I used to be like, oh my God, why don't you get it, mom? Or like, ugh, I just want to be like everybody else. And all these things that I really turned away from because all the stuff that I was being force fed at school. If I revisit those things in a way of like, no, this is actually the model. This is what my parents know. This is what my people do. Like, why do they have to learn my language? Why don't I learn that when my parents do this, you know, short of like really abusive things, but there are small things every day, hopefully, that you can recognize as like, oh, that's my parent asking me if I'm depressed. Unfortunately, a lot of times it does come across as like, you know, comments on your body or whatever. Like it's really filtered through all these traumatic lenses. But if you can personally find a way to kind of work through that and get to what they're actually trying to say, it will serve a different purpose for you, and it'll actually connect you with those people rather than pushing you away from them. And then they're confused and they're like, why is she so mad? I was just asking about whatever. And it can connect us rather than perpetuate that distance. And so I just want to put it out there that what we're doing is definitely not new. You know, our parents and our elder generations do recognize what we're doing. It's not like, oh my gosh, I don't understand. Like, why do you spend your time doing that? They're like, oh, I get it. You're doing the thing that we all do. So I just wanted to point that out there.
I think something is coming up a little different for me. I agree. I think to your point, Sarah, the way in which we view healing spaces is and can be very different. We have to be aware of how we're kind of, and how society is kind of packaging it, because there's subtleties, I think, to the way in which communities like our own do heal. But what's coming up, I think, different, or perhaps in contrast for me in hearing that is, and maybe others are kind of making sense of both what Calvin and Sarah said. And by the way, Calvin, I'm still back there and still very moved. So I'm trying to pick up my pieces while still in my feels about a lot of the things that you've shared. So thank you for that. But what comes up for me is the pieces I do know of my mother's poverty and abuse is something that I think certainly I have worked to provide explanation, not an excuse, but certainly explanation for the things that I think have carried on and carried through into our relationship. But I think what's sitting for me, and I'm feeling it, and you may be seeing it on my face, is that there's call it spiritual or religious, or maybe just even rationalization, but there's just something about at least for my own family of origin or culture, that refuse to have conversations, and not in a way that I think is defiant or defensive. I actually think in a way that they believe is protective, right? I don't want to talk about this. I am not going to talk about this. This is not okay to talk about. I don't want to feel bad, so I'm just not going to do it, right? And I have often probed for hoping to have really fruitful and cathartic conversations with my own parents about their past, or even understanding my parents' lineage. And I think the theme that came up for me in both of what you were sharing is access. Like there's a sort of a ambiguous loss and grief that comes with not having access to those stories, whether that be the outright refusal from someone right in front of us saying like, I'm not going there because I don't want to feel bad, or you don't need to know that or burden yourself with that. That was bad. Let's keep it here and locked tight. Or the literal and physical loss of someone and not having access, whether that be through language barriers or through intercontinental, divides. And so, I think if I try really hard to imagine, I know that certainly my family of origin had found ways to cope and perhaps even heal. But I still think I'm stuck back there and feeling as if there haven't been enough language spaces, ways to provide these kind of spaces yet. And so that's where I'm at. I'm kind of feeling like there's some loss that I'm feeling in like the lack of access to that, and then also, not to touch on it too much, but there's certainly, I think for me, a philosophical kind of like sprinkling into like religious philosophies that I think inform older generations about how they view evil spirits and evil, juju, that they certainly don't want to earth up in a way that I think we're willing to have that in order to build up a tolerance, because we see value sort of beyond. Anyway, that's what's coming up for me. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing that, Monica. And I think one of the themes that had kind of come up in a lot of our conversations, and actually even in the chat just now too, Richard mentioned, does that mean we solve our parents' trauma issues to tend to ours to come full circle? And I think one of the things that we've been discussing is how to not become entangled with the grief trauma of our parents and still preserve our own boundaries and sense of self. I think in such a culture that is bound to that collective, that filial piety, I think that's one of the things we have to wonder about. How do we understand ourselves? The metaphor is always your cup has to be full before you can fill the cups of others. So I think Bavia, I know that was something we I think chatted about before, kind of like how do you have your sense of self and how do you develop that up before you can and get a sense of your identity and your background before you can speak to your parents and other relatives. But yeah, if I could invite you to share some of your experiences, that'd be amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you. So transparency on feelings was not a thing at all in my home for pretty much all of my academic, K through 12, I think of it. And it was a lot. I was the oldest of three sisters. So two little sisters. My second one is 2 years younger than me. And then my youngest one there's an 8-year difference. So I didn't really have any sort of role model or someone to kind of look up to help me with like the meshing of Indian and American culture as I was growing up. I would go to school and I would have a different kind of reflection of like how I should be behaving and what I should be saying and doing. And then I would go home and there'd be Bollywood movies and Bollywood songs and culture and music. And those were kind of ways that I could learn to kind of reflect and understand how my parents would think or how they would kind of behave, because if I didn't have some sort of like cultural references to kind of go through, and they taught me the language and those kinds of things, and being able to speak to them in their language, like those were things that definitely helped me kind of understand how to communicate with them in some sense. But there was, in terms of what I was going through at school, they just didn't know how to respond to it besides rules and strictness. And my Wi-Fi would shut off at 11 p.m. every night. I was barely allowed to go to friends' houses, and I'm very community based as a human being. So I love people, and like that was really restrictive to me, and it felt unfair to me growing up. And did get a phone to like my senior year of high school. It was just it to some level felt like not necessary, and we didn't really know how to reconcile that. So there would just be a lot of fighting over that and what they thought was protective. And but like in what I found like later on, I think it was like through the way that my mom didn't work when my dad was a software engineer, and we would just travel project to project, and we moved a lot when we were younger. And it wasn't until I was entering high school that we kind of stabilized in one home. And I was just fortunate enough to be in so many different environments as I moved 7, 8 times earlier on, that I was like, okay, code switching is a thing. I can understand how to respond to different kinds of environments. Like I didn't really know what my personal identity was, but I was still learning just by reflecting from other people. And so like at the end of the day, I think so the big thing around my story is I found out when I entered college and had that independence for the first time that I have ADD combined type, so hyperactive and inattentive, and then dealing with anxiety on top of that, and then comorbid depression. So if I wasn't handling those earlier things, then a lot of that depression would come in afterward. And that actually translated in terms of grades for me, because I had never failed a class before. I had been decent in pretty much every class I'd been taken, A's and B's, and academics had become my identity because I was so sheltered from a lot of the rest of the world that I wanted to be involved in, but I was just not really allowed to be. And so then when that like jarring college kind of environment came, it was very hard for me and my family to deal with that, like the mental health side of things, because they were seeing me struggle in a way that they'd never seen before. And I had no idea how to fix it either. And they just wanted to help, but didn't really know how. So I was fortunate enough to be able to then try therapy, try medication, try different routes for it. And I thought that there would be an easy band-aid for it, but then the same kind of like I was getting A's and F's my first year of college, A's in everything I was interested in, F's in anything that was not really catching my attention or interest anymore, or wasn't attending classes because I just like couldn't make the right amount of time for it. I couldn't focus. I was going to the libraries and crying because I couldn't find a place to study, even though there was many places I could have sat and worked. But it was just the way ADD was showing up for me was very different, and it operates in such a different scale. And I think that understanding what my experience was and not having anyone to reflect that for, just be able to understand, like I felt in an environment that everyone was so smart around me. I'm like, why am I the one who's like not being able to do this? And just understanding that imposter syndrome. And the second year I was having a lot of the same problems even after getting diagnosed and trying medication. And then I realized there was just so much more to the puzzle, and medication is not a band-aid by any means. And it was just something that I had to understand, that there were many parts of I think of it like, I always talk about it like it's an orange and different slices of an orange. And like there would be family as one part of it, and my mental health is one part of it, and physical health is one part of it, and like how I was as a sister and sibling as a part of it. And like I just had to go from one thing at a time. And then a lot of the shifts started to happen in my junior year, and figuring out where to go from there. But after seeing me go through this mental health journey, my parents understood that like they started to pay attention to what I was going through, even though it was very hard for both of us. And now I think it's kind of I've just been very grateful that they've been willing to listen over the years, and it hasn't been easy. But like now with my youngest sister, who is Gen Z of the Gen Z, like she's so open-minded, she's hilarious, like she makes a lot of more jokes, and she like knows how to get the lighter side of my parents out. And like she's been inspiring to me in a sense, because like I would always just think everything around my parents had to be so serious all the time. And like, but she showed me ways that like had to make them laugh and like little things like that, and that start making conversations happen easier. And my sister in the middle, she's very passionate about the seriousness of like COVID and just political things going on, and she will start those tough conversations with my parents in a way that I'd never done before. So like learning from my younger siblings just as much as I learned from like my parents too was super important. So not to dive too deep in everything, but I think that like I just had learned so much from looking at outside of myself. But when I did start to focus on, okay, like I have to still take care of myself first before I'll be able to fill anyone else's bucket, like was really, really important. And getting those resources and support from whether it was my institution or different kinds of friends and family too, like it's important to not give up if like one thing doesn't go right and you're trying and that strategy doesn't work. I guarantee you there's a strategy for you that can definitely help you get to where you need to go in some sense of like your self-healing and self-love. So that's well, where I'll end that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bavia. I resonate on so many different levels, including, you know, my own experience with my mental health and how to communicate that to my parents who very much reject the validity of it. And, you know, I really appreciate you sharing such a vulnerable piece of your history with the rest of us. And, you know, I do see in the chat that many people resonate with you. So I guess to kind of transition to one of our last questions for the panel, I would love to invite Kiki to share, you know, how would you encourage others to share memories, especially in a culture that, you know, often requires us to keep things to ourselves?
Yeah, I think all of us have a way in terms of what we want to be heard, right? And also our parents have a way of communicating. And Calvin mentions, you know, his dad wrote, and I want to just like, it reminded me of something, how my father, for instance, he didn't say much. And I was so young and I want to know what happened to my trauma, like the actual accident, like the house fire, what happened? And I also wanted to know about my mom. My mom passed away from the incident. And Dr. Ben mentioned that part too about that grief and how sometimes they can't talk about because it brings up a lot of pain and a lot of painful memories that they needed to suppress in order to survive, in order to keep me safe and keep me fed and keep me going. And I think honoring those parts and recognizing the humanity in them for that, and also acknowledging like, okay, this is me speaking now as an adult, because back then I was not aware because I was a kid and I was so frustrated because I wanted him to talk to me, like verbalize it to me. It was not until, and I also resonate with, you know, Emily sharing in chat about, you know, feeling so, you know, upset sometimes and feeling frustrated. There's a lot of disconnect in communications with, and for my father, I wanted to know him so much and I didn't get that chance, but he spoke to me in different ways. Spoke to me like going to work early and making sure he gave me the money so that I could, you know, cook for my family or my sister can cook. He spoke to me in a way that when he passed away, few years later on, I came back to visit a 5th grade teacher, ESL teacher, and he saved me this poem that my dad wrote in Vietnamese. So I saw this poem he wrote about us, $5. So we have 5 sisters, 5 girls total. He wrote about us, and so my dad was definitely a man of few words, but there's hints somewhere. So my goal and my purpose really is just collect those stories, and like also something that I would recommend is just to pay attention to the ways, their language of love. You know, many in culture, like in Asian culture, is like through cutting fruits, through cooking for us so much food, you know, through inviting us back to their home for the holidays, or for me and my sisters, the way we, you know, spend time with each other or just honor our family memories is to celebrate like death anniversary, celebrate his birthday in my culture, Vietnamese culture, we celebrate the death, the people who pass away and our ancestors in that way. We burn incense, or we, cut fruits again. So, and cook, chicken. My dad's favorite meal was chicken salad. And so we make chicken salad often, almost every death anniversaries. And simple gestures like that, and to connect with the past, to communicate with the people who pass away, but also like in the present, like how can I communicate with my current family? So that's how I communicate with my sisters, to meals pretty much majority of the time, or take hikes and to just do simple things. But I think oftentimes we forget that it's just really what we need to communicate in ways that work for them as well, rather than just what works for us. So just pay attention to the different language of love that they give us and find that common ground.
I feel my heart tremble. Thank you for sharing that. I'm processing. I feel like, to your point, to figure out not only what we require for us to feel love, but to recognize that our parents have their own ways of showing and receiving love is maybe a difference that sometimes we forget to really consider as we interact with them. So, unfortunately, we are running out of time for our panel discussion, but we will be going into breakout rooms where each panelist will join one of the Waves facilitators, where we can continue an activity. Christian, can I invite you to share your screen? So we have prepared a little exercise called the Where I Am From poem to kind of help us, brainstorm kind of, who we are, where we're from, in an artistic way, hopefully. And so that we can kind of share with each other in small groups and kind of have more discussion on a more intimate level. So here's the link. I think we have it in the chat as well as on the screen. Christian will be assigning people to the small groups, and we will come back for a large group debrief after that.
And just give me a minute, because I forget that this always takes a really long time to set up, especially with this many folks.
Yeah,
Just bear
use
with
the
me.
elevator.
I know, but I guess one thing could potentially invite the panelists, if there's any last takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience before we break out. Just curious if anything kind of comes to mind, or any advice that you'd want to share.
Wanted to say something quickly. What I heard from everyone was that maybe the remarkable thing is that you are already communicating with the loved one you're trying to reach, but you haven't aligned the frame the way that is present. And I think what we should do more of is conscious awareness about what is already happening, how they are already trying to communicate with you, and that are not direct, they're nuanced. And if you can frame it in that, or align it in that perspective, maybe it is already happening. They're trying to reach out to you in their own way. And with that conscious awareness day to day, you realize that the work is already being done. And maybe the hard work really isn't to try to acquire something external that isn't happening yet, but maybe already realizing what is already happening and seeing it through that frame and documenting that until it becomes second nature, and learning that it's not that they don't know a language, you're just speaking two different languages that can connect in the middle, or is already connecting the middle, as long as you look in the right place.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think by honoring our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors' experiences along with our own, maybe that is a part of healing.
I just wanted to take a moment to have everyone check in with themselves, actually. Just as we're moving along in some of these topics, I certainly want to honor the through line that we started to bring in from the beginning of our time to make sure that as you're checking in with yourself and your breath and your body, if there is anything that you need right now, that you seize that and meet those needs for yourself, and knowing that these topics can bring up a lot of reflection. Certainly, when we talk about doing the work and sort of the healing work, it's not linear, and it's certainly not something that has necessarily an endpoint to it, and the process is so important. So you are part of that process, and to make sure that that is the case. So that's what I wanted to use our time for while Christian's setting us up.
Also, feel free to get started on your poem. It seemed like an easy activity, but it actually took me a while to kind of work on it.
Yeah, almost there. But yeah, if any of the other panelists have anything, some advice that they'd like to share to the audience, please definitely feel free to mention.
I'd like to say that if anyone needs a great new audiobook or book to read, The Monsoon Diaries is really, really excellent. And I just started reading it. And what's really cool is that it's in Calvin's voice. So I just feel like I'm like getting to know him. It's so good so far. I just started it and I just love the storytelling in it. And it's really, really fantastic if you want to hear the experience from a doctor's perspective of what it was really like to be in the midst of this in really interesting COVID crisis. But I really think it's opened my eyes to a lot of different things, even that I was not aware of before. But I just gotten started with it. So I think I'm looking forward to reading some more.
Thank you, Bavia. That really means a lot to me. Thank you.
All right, cool. I think just about have it. I realized that we still have to have the lobby open. So I think we'll have one group. If you are inclined to stay in this room that's going to be on the recording session, feel free to stay on, but most folks should be assigned. I'm going to open up the rooms in just a second, just doing some last minute evening out. But yeah, so feel free to stay in for that session. So, and we'll be done in, okay, cool. So I will open all of the rooms up. Everyone should be getting a notice, so feel free to hop in and we'll see folks in a few.
Where did my invitation go?
Oh, did it disappear? You should be able to hop in from the breakout rooms. I think you should be able to add your own, but I can also, I think, just re-invite you.
I got it. I'm group 5, right?
Yes, you should be in the room with Calvin. So. All right. Yeah, for those who are still with us here, actually there shouldn't really be anyone, but you're welcome to join the conversation. And I don't know where Bavia went, but I know she was supposed to be in this room. So let me go take a quick look for that. Where did Bavia go? Right. Oh, okay, there we go. Hey, Bavia, I think I moved you to the wrong room, but let me just make sure there's someone in room 2 who's the Monica. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, sweet. So yeah, for this session, it's just something that we invite folks to. We just want to have some at least a bit of a debrief. Like after all of these, for all of our Waves events, we always want the focus to be especially on kind of the folks who are attending. As I mentioned at the top of the session, there really is that keen importance on the fact that we all have stories worth telling, and we do highlight certain panelists who have joined us, but yeah, we always want to invite people to realize that, what's going on in your individual lives, no matter where you're at, is worth sharing. And having that validation importance is really important for us, because we know we've all needed it in our lives. And at least speaking for myself and some of the other team, that it's very much sometimes life-saving to be able to have those communities. And Richard, thanks for joining. Yeah, it's definitely pleasure to have you along. And for folks who are still in the main session, if you'd like to join a breakout, you do have the option to, I believe, down below, but let me know otherwise. But yeah, so I think with that in mind, we'd like to definitely invite folks, if you have done a poem, if you'd like to share out to the group, and feel free to come off camera if you're so inclined. But again, as I mentioned, this is something that we definitely want just be more conversational. Again, no pressure. This is one of those spaces where we do just invite folks to whatever feels comfortable for them to share. So with that in mind, I realize I have not done my poem, so I should probably do that. But Bavia, I don't know if you've done it as well, but can invite you to potentially share out too. So
Yeah, I definitely got to cheat a little bit because I got the link a little bit earlier, but yeah, it took me a couple minutes to do. So I would say take your time and think through it. And I had to kind of hop around as I thought of answers to different ones. And then I came back to, it's kind of difficult for me, but I wrote it out now. I can share mine. Yeah, so I am from by Bavia. All right. I am from yoga, pujas, pranayam, from Pond's powder, salwar, and saris. I am from Truth is God, which is a quote my mom would say all the time, and bilingual family fights and Bollywood movie nights. I am from agarbatti, which means incense, whose sense would remind me home is a place I can eventually cleanse and heal. I'm from voracious reading and vegetarianism. I'm from Sachidanand and Shakuntala, my grandparents, and from restriction and relocation, from a collective focused culture. I'm from a family negotiated astrology verified arranged marriage, from dechal and roti sabji foods, from a grandmother who built the first school for the disabled and impoverished in her village, and from a grandfather in politics who sacrificed often for the greater good. I'm from Sparkles, my baby pupper, Seth's animal, and I'm from the moments India intertwined with America that nurtured and enriched me in ways unimaginable to me, for which I'm every day grateful. So that is what I wrote earlier today. I would love to invite anyone else to share who, who has written theirs. Thank you.
And I am still writing. I got the link very, very early, so I should have done this, but there was all of the other prep to do. So, but yeah, if anyone else is willing to share, feel free. But I think also one of the things we can just to talk about is just from I think the session itself, if there's anything that came to mind, resonated with folks, or if anyone just has a story they'd like to share. I mean, by all means, feel free to just hop in, chime in. But yeah, just kind of, again, an open floor to see what might have resonated with folks. And I guess, Bobby, I can throw it back to you. We can do a bit of a fireside chat too. I know that's one of the things that definitely would love to at least catch up on some of your like kind of what's been on the forefront for you. Especially, I'd love to hear about the show you have upcoming with MTV. I think the last time we really chatted was was it back in May now? So, but yeah, like I guess in terms of what you're looking to explore, and then maybe how some of the themes of this event may influence some of that work you're kind of bringing to the community and our culture. But yeah.
Absolutely. So in Elegancies, which is the name of my business, which started off as a blog I used to write. It was just like my private catharsis. It was not even open to anyone else to be able to read. It was just where I would express, like, I've always loved reading and writing a lot because it would just be that creative medium for me. But now, after moving to LA, I really want to focus on sharing a lot of these underrepresented, untold stories from different people in different walks of life, whether it's a therapist, whether it's someone who is in product management, whether it's someone who is out in the world in entertainment, and or whichever, having different people from different industries kind of speak on their stories. Like a veteran mom, for example. I'm neither a veteran nor a mom, but there's so much I can glean from just learning from an experience that is completely unlike mine. And that's really what the show Off the Pedestal is about, which is like taking people off this sort of this sort of like untold, it seems like they feel so different from us in a way where we feel like we don't know how to bridge our humanity together, and just making it an open conversation about an important story that they want to share. Like I shared earlier today about like my academics, but that was such a turning point in my life. But that kind of story really truly is not the anomaly. I think so many of us have such poignant stories and really important stories that like change the trajectory of our lives, but they don't necessarily get that much fanfare. And I really feel like that sharing those stories are really the key to generating more of that empathy, removing some of that stigma. So that show, I'm really excited, will be starting release in January. And in Elegancies, which is the business side of what I'm doing, is really should build a community around that too. So if you're listening to the show and you want to engage with the speakers in a Zoom session afterward, or in our Discord, and just having a place to like vent and talk about what you're going through, like that's kind of what I want to keep going, and have that mental health safe space kind of continue, especially, and not really have that pinned by an age necessarily. And if you're younger or older, wherever you want to identify, I just want you to be able to come into a place where at least our values are shared. And so that's the kind of community I'm just trying to build. So everyone is welcome to be a part of that here. And but yeah, Christian, I would also like to ask you, like, you have such an incredible background as well, and you have such an incredible story. I think it would be amazing if you wanted to share a little bit about where you're from, and what has brought you to Waves and creating what you have, because it's just such an incredible story.
Yeah, no, I am. Thanks for throwing them back at me. I'm almost done with my poem too, so that might help frame it. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, no. So yeah, I think at least the so originally from the East Coast, Jersey, and mental health has always been a huge thing for I think my development growth. For one, as I mentioned, top of the session, I'm a survivor of major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety. And it's been something that without community and friends and family support, I 1000% know I would not be alive. It's just one of those things where I very much did not kind of see a lot of self-efficacy value. And it was just took a lot of family and friends just like really kind of sticking out for me and telling me that I am worth it. And it's one of those things, I know that there are so many people out there who don't have those sorts of communities, and that can kind of lift and support them. And that's something that I've always wanted to be able to kind of give back. And yeah, so I think back in 2019 now, so the Waves group was something I've co-founded with my one friend back in New York. We were at a roundtable event, and we weren't friends at the point. He was just like starting this meetup, and then I kind of like linked up with him and just talking about how do we create, because at least mental health, there's definitely a lot of resources available for that they're out there, but the problem is there really isn't that much. There's a lot of stigma around it, as I mentioned, and there's very much kind of that disinclination to seek services, especially if your family doesn't know what kind of is entailed by mental health and treatment. And one of the things, for better and for worse, that I was lucky to have is my mom suffers from major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety as well, and also bouts of psychosis, etc. And it's been one of those things where recognizing the signs in my mother, my family was able to tell that I had similar symptoms and conditions, and were able to get me the proper health and treatment. But there are so many folks who don't have that. Like, as a child growing up in school, I would constantly berate myself and like beat myself up for just doing poorly, like talking to like good student, but never feeling good enough. And yeah, it was one of those things where it was, when it comes to at least physical health, you can tell like, oh yeah, my foot hurts. And it's like, you go to a doctor. But with mental health, it's just like, oh, I feel bad about myself. And that's because I feel bad about myself, not considering like, oh, there may be other factors going into it, whether it's the like psychological, developmental, or even just for me in my case, like chemical imbalance, a whole confluence of those matters. So, but again, the big issue is there are treatment services out there, but awareness is very much something that isn't as advertised, advocated. Being able to have those informal conversations, to hear people share their stories where they're like, oh yeah, I experienced this way, this XYZ, and you kind of have that resonance of, oh yeah, I had that too. Maybe there's something that would be helpful for me to check out based off what someone else shared. And I think those sorts of things, being able to bring those up to the surface, was kind of the core of ways. Like I mentioned, we all have stories worth sharing. That was like very much the founding tenet of the Waves group. And then, yeah, going into kind of how AMHC started, we've partnered with the folks who are running the Subtle Asian Mental Health group. And yeah, so, and the Asian Mental Health Professionals group. And at that time, they were filing for their 501c3 status under the banner of the Asian Mental Health Collective. So this was back during, I think, once the pandemic really was starting. So that was kind of when we founded the org. And yeah, since then we've been just kind of being able to create these resources and connect different orgs. Like we were able to do the Lotus Therapy Fund, which has been really amazing, with a lot of support from kind of like, at least one of like recently, Constance Wu was on Celebrity Jeopardy, and he raised some funds for us through that, which was really awesome. A lot of times it's like, I don't know how people keep hearing about us, but it's really cool. We're an all volunteer run org, so this is all just passion and passion projects for the past few years. And yeah, it's been a wonderful experience being able to see kind of the community grow around us and develop, and just having these spaces to open and share. But yeah, so it's kind of a bit of that background. Really long roundabout, I suppose, but a lot of just random thoughts that always kind of run through my head when I kind of go through all this. So
you built something really beautiful, and I think you should be really proud of yourself for it. I'm so amazed by everything that I've been a part of, even, and it's just really amazing to see how you see changed from what you were going through, and now building it such a space for others. It's really beautiful. I'd love to hear your poem too, if you've written it out.
I am like 3 blanks away from it, but yeah, no, I think that's one of the things that's been really keen on me, is like, even though there's a lot of loss and difficulties in our life, but I think that's kind of what spurs a lot of that creativity to improve. Like there's a lot of times where if you feel like taken down by things that have been like really difficult, it gives you that unique perspective on what that feels like. And if you're able to kind of turn that around, that loss, that emptiness, into something that you can create, it can be very powerful. For me, the main reason that's always been in the back of my head for founding this group is if I could go back in time 10, 20 years to tell myself something, to tell myself that it is going to be okay, and that you are worth something, that you're loved, and that you should love yourself and care for yourself. That's what I want to see through this group. And it's been great to hear like folks, I mean, they have like Bavia, just like connecting with you through the youth forum. That was definitely a dream of mine, to be able to go to the White House and see y'all on stage. That was one of my I don't have kids or anything, but that was like such a proud papa moment for me. I'm like, oh, look at y'all just kind of representing. It was, yeah, it was so inspiring to see, to be able to help with that, and then see like, yeah, the next generation's doing it, and they're like, I definitely feel it's been a feeling of great validation, and I've accepted it for myself to be able to say like, yeah, like we're doing the work and we're moving it forward. And I just am hoping and happy to be able to hopefully share this to, I mean, through this event, to other generations as well, who, again, as we mentioned, don't have that language. One of the things I always talk about is I always have that great fear of like, when my parents pass away, I won't know their stories. It's always such a hard topic to broach sometimes, where you can't just be like, hey, tell me your life story, Dad. Like, why did you do that? Why are you feeling this way, Mom? And there's definitely ways kind of to do, like we talked about journaling, we talked about like having them share and journal, or like having them cook. But it's something that losing a bit of that ancestral memory and learning about what makes them, because it also has an extension of what makes you. It's like one of those things that we kind of always forget is like, our parents were children at some point. They're still children. And yeah, there's definitely things that I like, again, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure get lost in the shuffle once you have to start being the caregiver for someone else, that needs get suppressed and put to the side. And I think that's something where kind of just opening that space to be able to share, I think, is important. But yeah, if anybody else has their poem up and running too, or would like to share thoughts or comments, feel free. Feel free to also mention in the chat too. That's one thing I forgot to mention. We're very keen on just like opening space to folks who, however they want to communicate and express. That's super important. But yeah, and I swear I'm going to finish this poem by the end of this session. We're probably going to regroup in like a couple of minutes or so, but Bavia, I'm going to throw it back to you to go into like, what are your next steps you feel in your life to just for yourself, and also to like outreach your family and your ancestors, and be more in tune, in touch.
Yeah, I think a big part of that for me is truly just in the way that Calvin was describing as well, like meeting them where they're at, in a sense. And I think that a lot of what is able to be now with the way that my family and I communicate is because an after effect of all of those harder discussions, and being vulnerable to a point that it really hurt to be, because I just didn't. A lot of the reasons I think that so much is suppressed in our cultures can be because like we just don't want to hurt one another, or we don't feel like it's a topic that can be safely broached. And like navigating at what point do you change that, and at what point do you break that sort of like barrier, and even if you can break that barrier in the first place. And like that was something that it takes vulnerability, it takes the right time and place sometimes, but sometimes for me, I just realized there was no right time or place. I just was going through what I was going through, and at some point it felt like what is it called? It just felt like the tipping point, and I had to express that I was just not okay. And I think that it was a weird situation, because I think that I hadn't really focused too much on like what they had gone through until I had gone through what I was going through. And then we got to look at each other and be like, we both have different backgrounds and past that have really informed who we are now. So it can be as simple as just like asking them questions or silly stories about their past, and like what things they were interested in when they were our age. And sometimes they'll engage, sometimes they won't. But I just think that sometimes it can be as simple as just the simple activities, whether you're sitting at a table at dinner, or even just a text or a call can be so meaningful. So were the breakout room questions, were they supposed to be posted here? Because I can put them here.
Oh, forgot that. We are also about to regroup too, but on that, I also have finally finished my poem, so I guess we can close out this session with it. All right. I am from, like Christian, I am from the amazing state of New Jersey, from gaming and running. I'm from the burbs and in the Roman Catholic neighborhood. I am from the moon, the Luna, who is warm but distant. I'm from tinkling sticks and coconuts, so, and from DeLunas and Santoses, from Filipinos and foods, from quiet suffering and strength. I'm from Sunday Mass, from Nalaga and Sisig, from a father losing his parents when he was 15, and from a mother being forced to move to a better life. Wondering why I am crying, why they are crying. I'm from moments of struggle and growth. I am me, and that is amazing. So that was a lot of effort to finally put that. I should have done that ahead of time, do my homework ahead of time, but that is how it is. So, okay. And with that, I'm going to signal the close of all the rooms. So yeah, anybody, you have 60 seconds if you want to share your poem or mention anything in the chat before everyone else kind of comes back in and joins us. Feel free to mention. Otherwise, yeah. And as folks are joining in, we're just wrapping up in here. So let me see. So as folks are coming back in, I think we're going to be moving into some of our the large group debrief. So I'll just give folks, I think the rooms should be closing out relatively soon. I don't see at least the time, the countdown. But okay.
Our group just had an awesome poem just dropped like right before we came back into this group. So I'm kind of like, and then we came back to this group. So I didn't get a chance to fully express myself. So it was great though.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the things too. Will be we definitely want to invite folks to kind of just share what they might have gone over. So if there's anyone who wants to be able to take the mic, or facilitators, panelists, if you have something you'd like to call out that was really interesting or topical, feel free to grab the mic and chat about it.
This is Sarah. I just want to give a shout out to all the parents who have joined us today that, you know, we're talking about how it's so soothing and nice to like hear each other's stories, and it's like really valuable for me to hear my own experience spoken by someone else. But then like an even cooler layer is to hear a parent talking about the work that they're doing and how hard it is, by the way, parenting, and then on top of that, really trying to undo or integrate all these generational traits. And I think it also feels really good to hear that too. So thanks to all the parents who are here.
Yeah, I definitely would like to echo that, Sarah. I think it's very powerful for us to, you know, really take ownership in our roles in other people's lives, and, you know, heal ourselves so that we can be healing to other people. So I am hearing there's an awesome poem that Amy has written. I was wondering if she would be willing to share it in this space by reciting it for us, or even sending it through the chat.
Sure. I am from a pink and purple backpack, from broken glass and donuts. I am from alone and cold and scary and lonely. I am from maple tree who whispers. I am from doll and cat, from dad and mom, and from hiding and abiding. From lying, I am from death, from pot roast and beans and rice, from divorce and from remarriage, separation. I am from the moments of secrets and lies.
Thank you for sharing that, Amy. Monica, you mentioned that you had some reaction. Would you like to share?
Oh, my reaction to Amy's awesomeness and creativity in like a minute. She like wrote that. Well, that's what I was also just genuinely touched by. But also, I also think when I heard that, I appreciated the sort of entanglement and complexity in so many words. That's kind of what I'm projecting onto it. And I don't know. Of course, we have to hear from the wonderful poet, but I think it's nostalgia that comes up for me about food and about things that aren't shared or said. And yet there's so many things that are in gestures, which is what I think, to the point of what Sarah was saying earlier in our panel discussion. And I think a lot of people were echoing was how do we work to translate those and that it doesn't always have to be pretty. It doesn't always have to be beautiful in the way that, maybe we stereotypically think of it. And I liked the messiness or language around it. I think it described it pretty well for me. That's what I was reacting to.
Thank you, Monica. I also kind of want to open up the space if anybody else would like to share their poem with the collective group. This is a safe space for you to do so right now, or even any of the panelists, if you did the activity yourself, would love to hear yours. Okay, I guess not. That's okay.
I can share.
Okay.
Sorry, hi. Okay. I am from a carpet with a city imprint on it, from the Tarzan VCR tape in the backyard shed. I am from identities I can't quite fit into and taking the most from nothing. I am from California poppies whose roots twirl my duck-tailed hair. I am from rocks and shoes and scrapes on knees, from Letitia and Sancho, and from stubbornness and patience, from interchanging, being a warrior and a worrier. I am from awkward family prayers, from enchiladas and sisig, from the Vietnam War, and from the boxing ring in Mexico, a toy car I stole in kindergarten. I am from the moments sharing what makes me uncomfortable because no one else is saying anything. Thank you.
Damn.
Thank you,
Got chills.
Frankie. That was, yeah. Yeah, props on that one. Thank you for sharing. It's,
I'm shaking.
Yeah, no, but you killed it. So
I'm
that was
shaking.
awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. So I know,
Cool.
as the event come to an end, we have another interactive, just a quick reflection for people to share how you're feeling. And also if there's more poems, and Amy and Frankie, if you would like to send your poems to us, either via social media or you can email it to us, we would love to share your poems on some of our channels.
Cool. Yeah. And as Kimmy mentioned, so we have our one last reflection event. So yeah, if folks are able to scan, it's kind of what we did at the top of the session, but again, we always like to see kind of what were some of the takeaways from the event, how folks are feeling now. Hopefully it's been helpful, uplifting. I don't want to bias the results, but yeah, we're always, again, keen on knowing how, most importantly, how y'all are feeling, and if this was something that hopefully was helpful and hopefully gives you some next steps to think about for how you want to, if anything, close out the year. We're already at the end of it mostly. So, but yeah, and I think I'll actually do this exercise too, just to, I feel like I need that self-reflection, step back a bit. Give folks 5 more seconds. Get your answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're going to the next slide. All right, what do we got? How are you feeling? Inspired, reflective, hopeful, connected, full, validated, curious, sad, thoughtful, thankful, challenged, riveted, humble. Yeah, these are all great. There is no tired, hungry, exhausted. That's always what we love to see. It's oh, ready to nap, but that's different. That's that is definitely, I can sympathize with that too. But yeah, all in all, it's always wonderful to kind of see like just I don't know how folks really do like take, I guess, to the space. I have no words. Well, all the words are there, so I'm not even gonna. I'm gonna let y'all just like look at it. I'm gonna shut my mouth and yeah, just let folks reflect because it's always wonderful to just see it there. But
Yeah, and to Jocelyn's point in the chat, there's also a second prompt in the same activity. If you would like to share a few anonymous word about this event, what you learned, what came up for you, anything really that you'd like to share with the group, we would love to hear from you. And yes, not alone, indeed, Bavia.
is it on here, by the way? I don't know if I have to click. I don't see the little mini thingy.
Yeah, I think you have to click the little next button.
Oh, there we go. Cool. All right. Oh, I probably did that too early, didn't I? Oh, and we're back at the top. Forgive me for all these technical malfunctions. I will let me hop back into that one. Okay, and you know what? I'll submit one too, so that way I'll know how much time is needed to actually do this. Okay. And I'm going to hit the next. Yep. Okay. Share a few words anonymously. What do we got? Interconnected, self-compassion is key. Process is happening now and being present, acknowledge it, and dance the dance together. I'll scroll through this, and if anyone notices anything that really brings out, people are amazing. Love the event, grounded, not alone. Realignment. Yep. That's a great way to think about it. Oh, I didn't even talk about the well analogy. That was my favorite. I should have jotted that one down.
Guess we'll have another session.
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't want to leave people hanging though. Can you give like a few words on it? Because I love that analogy so much, but I had to. Yeah,
it's something I actually ironically learned in my rebellion against medical school. Medical school was all about empathy. And, you know, I'm a big rebel questioner. I'm like, what is this E word that it's the hot new word of medical school. They're like franchising it, commodifying it. And it really bothered me because when it came to patient care, I learned that empathy was actually harming our patients and ourselves. And I learned that what we should do, at least my generation of doctors, what I beseech upon them is to learn the word compassion more than empathy, because the idea of empathy is we get in the well with all our patients or other people, or the people we're trying to communicate with. Let's say it's someone that we want to reach out to, not necessarily patients, but getting the well with them. If they're hurting, we try to understand what they're going through. And a lot of it may be just giving them what they want a little bit, so in the hopes that they will pick up and take care of themselves on their own. But that's not what usually happens. Compassion is not getting in the well. It's acknowledging they are in the well and giving them the rope so that they know how to get back on their feet on their own. So self-determination, so that it's sustainable, so that you're not pulled in a direction that you necessarily don't want to be pulled into. And I think in our small groups, we've discussed what boundaries look like for some people. And I think that's very important to establish, because, you know, not having a fence, you blur the lines, and where do you begin and where do your parents or your guardians begin? And it's very hard to self-determine your identity without those boundaries being in place. And compassion is a respect of those boundaries, whereas empathy is a blurring. So when we, communicate with the people we want to communicate and reach out to, understanding the difference between the two is actually pretty powerful to maintaining your own sanity, so that the efforts may continue even if the first couple of attempts may not be go as well as you want to. Having compassion gives you more of a fuller cup to continue what you're doing, rather than drain your cup so quickly when you try to practice empathy.
Yeah, I'm hearing kind of recognizing our own boundaries and requirements in order to maintain ourselves, so that we can continue to do the work to heal and heal others as well. So.
And yeah, just to close out, so I'm gonna stop sharing, but yeah, no, so at the very least, thank you everyone for joining. So I think for one, definitely want to give a shout out to our panelists, our volunteers, especially. I can't do this without y'all, and everyone just for showing up today. A lot of times it's a lot of big effort to just kind of come out to something and listen in and confront a lot of these things in and of ourselves. So really applaud yourselves for doing the work and coming in to be able to learn and heal. And yeah, so I think for one, we're going to be sharing out our resources that we've aggregated for this event. We have the recording for this. We'll share out some of the content on our social media channels. And yeah, we also will be sending out a follow-up survey for feedback from y'all from the event, and kind of what you may potentially like to see in future events, panel events, just topics, etc. Or what you would potentially like to see AMHC as an organization move towards as a whole, to help with that raising awareness and understanding, normalizing, destigmatizing mental health in our communities. And then one thing to note, so as far as announcements go for the org, we're going to be having our next round of the Lotus Therapy Fund. So we just released this recent cohort, being able to share 130K for 30 participants in this section's cohort to receive 8 free covered sessions of therapy. And again, we're looking to continue that in going into the next year. So follow us on our social channels to hear more if that's something of interest. And yeah, and also just make sure to check us out on Facebook on our Subtle Asian Mental Health page, Asian Mental Health Professionals Facebook group for those who are new to the field or veterans in the field, just to be able to find a community. If you're interested in joining the Waves team, feel free to reach out. And yeah,
And
also would like,
if
yeah,
you
go ahead, Kim.
if you're a provider who's interested in providing care, joining our, either our listing on our website, or, providing providing care to our recipients, please do reach out and let us know as well.
And lastly, I'd also like to open up to the panelists as well, if there's anything that you'd like to mention for just in terms of kind of your resources or any offerings that, or on behalf of your organizations, if anything's upcoming, would definitely love to open that space up too, or close out.
All right.
We'll leave it at that.
Again, thank you all so much for joining us in this space. Thank you, Christian, for being an amazing co-host with me.
Thank you, Kimmy.
Let's give ourselves a round of applause, y'all.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone for showing up.
This was a, amazing, but, for me, a little hard conversation to have. But yeah, check us out on social media. We'll hopefully be hosting some other events soon in the next year, but I hope everyone has a great holiday season. Take good care, and we will see each other again. Bye.
All right, stopping the recording and stopping the live stream. I don't know if they've stopped.